utilitarian is an attempt, right? So utilitarianism is an attempt to offer an ethical account, right? But you also have a naturalistic account. And I'm not going to get into that, but you have a naturalistic account of attempting to describe ethics, right? So that there is some biological normativity. That's a mouthful, right? But there is some biological normativity in the fact that human beings across the globe, no matter where we are, all have various constructs of morality, right? They manifest. Our morality manifests globally in religion, in our belief systems, in how we interact with others, right? We all have statements, propositions that have the word should or ought in it. You should do something. Not you are doing something, but you should do something. You ought to do something, right? And how is that possible? Well, naturalistic ethic accounts for an attempt that is itself reducible in experience. And then the last one would be, well, there's a lot of these. I'm not going to go through all of them. But the first ones that come to my mind, you have an emotive, E-M-O, you have an emotive account of ethics. You can also talk about imperatives. That would be an account. You can give accounts of ethics. There's a ton of accounts of ethics that you can give that would sort of conform to logical positivism, right? That there wouldn't be a contradiction in discussing any of these in terms of logical positivism. It's not to say that logical positivists necessarily purported all of these, but that yes, there can be an account of ethics incorporated. There can be a prescriptive, not a descriptive account incorporated in logical positivism, which is itself not contradictory to the principle of verifiability, right? And here's a description of some of those. Okay, and then the last is language. Right. So the last field of study that was most affected by logical positivist thought is sort of semantics, language, the analysis of language. And it's interesting. To me personally, it's probably the most interesting of the three fields, right? Science is interesting, but I'm less excited about sort of the analysis of scientific discovery and scientific propositions and claims and statements. Ethics is interesting to some, but for me, again, same. But language, right? Language is interesting, right? And for me, why do I believe that this is, and I do believe that this is the greatest contribution. Now, there are tons of things that I disagree with logical positivists for, but I'm not going to describe that in a lecture. The point of the lecture is for someone who does not understand what this is to understand what it is. What I feel the greatest contribution of logical positivists, and I'm remorse that there wasn't more writing and continued writing in logical positivism, has to do with language. The question is, what is the relationship between an explanation of a descriptive account of reality and an understanding of language, right? Because if we have the perceiver and we have the external world here, and we have the external world, my attempt to describe, right, remember we're talking about description, my attempt to describe this thing, this specific thing, I would say this thing is blue, right, and that would be true. And then I could say this thing is a box. That would be true. And then I could go on and on and on. I could say a box is a four-sided enclosed figure with angles totaling 360 degrees, right? I could say that. That would be true. And then I can add to that, and I can add to that. I can build a very, very complicated set of statements based on just this very simple thing being the box, right? And insofar as I've been able to do that, I've in some sense, in my analysis, logically, what I'm doing is I'm not looking at the thing itself. Remember, it's a meta-descriptive account. That's the most important thing. I'm not describing the box. That's not logical positivism. I'm attempting to analyze, rather, descriptions of this box. So what I'm doing is I'm analyzing this, right? I'm interested not in talking about the thing being blue or the fact that this thing is a box, but I'm interested in talking about the words, the language used to describe this thing. Obviously, this is English, right? If I was French, it would be in French. If I was Arabic, it would be in Arabic, and so on, right? So I'm interested in the language used to describe this phenomenon, this experience. The question then becomes, and this gets a huge field of analysis sort of blossoms out of this. A huge field of analysis blossoms out of this. Is that the content of my understanding, my mind, right? And when I say mind now, I'm not thinking of mind as this immaterial Cartesian mind. I'm thinking of a very physical mind, a mind that is biological, neurons and axons connecting, and dendrites and you know, chemically saturated within the brain. That mind, right? My ability to think, right? It's a biological, physical thing. My mind is no different than my hand or my fingernails. It's a product of my biology. That mind. Well, how is it that my mind comes to understand the world? Right? So that becomes the question. What's the relationship between, you could say, thought in the world, thought / mind, and the world? Remember, reality. Right? What is the relationship between thought / mind and the world, right? And the way that you come to understand this relationship is not, again, by looking at reality itself, but by looking at the language which describes reality, right? The language which describes reality. This thing is blue. What does it mean for that thing to be blue? Well, an example that just popped to mind, David Hume has an example of a missing shade of blue, right? Imagine that you had a color chart, and it goes from the lightest shade of blue, like sky blue, or even lighter than that. I'm not, you know, an artist, but the lightest shade of blue that you can have, until, and it's a gradation, until we get to the darkest navy blue, and whatever that is, that darkest shade of blue. So you have this spectrum, if you will, of blue. So we have from a lighter to a darker shade of blue, right? And imagine, however, that there was one shade of blue that was missing in this continuum, right? It was missing. We had the shade of blue before, and we had the shade of blue after, but the actual shade of blue was missing on the color chart. The question then becomes, would it be possible, and the question that I'm posing actually, because obviously Hume came before logical positivists, but I think this connects, so that's why I'm asking it. Would it be possible to conceptualize this missing shade of blue? Well, I think Hume and the positivists would actually agree on that, right? The answer is absolutely not. You're not going to be able to infer what's missing from all the previous shades of blue, right? You're not going to be able to deduce what's missing from all the subsequent shades of blue, right? You're not going to be able to do that. Without it being represented, you're not going to be able to have an image in your mind of what that thing is, right? So that, in a sense, this is a very simple demonstration of the principle of verifiability. But more importantly, however, is if I were to describe a missing shade of blue, if I were to describe, and I think this is the clearest explanation possible of positivism, if I were to write what I just said, everything that I just said for the past few minutes, if I were to write that down on a sheet of paper, and I were to talk about the continuum and the spectrum of blue, and I was to talk about the missing shade of blue, the question is, does my claim about the missing shade of blue, in writing it, in speaking it, does it have any meaning?